Here today, this afternoon, we'll have the privilege to hear from a great group of artists, curators, and scholars on their perspectives on the subject of art and violence. So I'd like to do a few thank yous before we start. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors, ISLA, the Institute for Studies on Latin American Art, Ariel Isaacs and Mercedes Cohen, who are here with us today, and really without your support, this would not have been possible. So many, many thanks. Our curatorial, fabulous assistant curator, Vanessa Gordillo, there. Many, many thanks to all the artists of the exhibition, and especially the ones who are with us here today, Iván Argote, José Carlos Martinat, Yucef Merhi, Mondongo, Juliana, Laffitte, and Manuel Mendanha, Giancarlo Scaglia, Javier Téllez, who couldn't come because he is sick, but we're going to have a great panel of artists, and Juan Toro. And Teresa Margolles is also here in New York and is coming to the opening. So thank you all of you for coming and being with us here this afternoon. Our fabulous panelists, Gustavo Butnix, who is here, who's going to be our first speaker. He's our keynote speaker today. Estrellita Brodsky, Cecilia-Fajardo Hill, and Gabriela Rangel. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And my sincere thanks goes to the Office of Advancements of Research at John Jay College, especially to Anthony Carpi, Susie Mendes, and Danielle Stageman, and also my colleagues here at John Jay College, John Gutierrez, who was fabulous in helping to promote the symposium, Marcia Sparsa, Patricia Tovar, Sylvia Dapia, Alison Pease. Thank you all really for being, and Katie Gentile, for being such good friends and supporters. So we're going to start. I'd like to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Gustavo Butnix, who is going to talk about the poetics of the remains, melancholics of violence in contemporary Peruvian art. Gustavo Butnix is an art historian, theorist, curator, and museum activist. He was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, but grew up in Lima, Peru, where he's currently based. He graduated from Harvard University and has taught art history at the University of San Marco in Lima and in universities in Buenos Aires, São Paulo, and Mexico. His work explores symbolic constructions under complex historical circumstances and the relationship between art and violence, art and politics, and art and religion. So let's welcome Gustavo. So we need the lights down.
Oh, here it is.
Okay. What else?
That's the page I was missing. Okay. Well, how do I turn this on? I want to verily thank Claudia, Vanessa, and the initiators of this program. It is a privilege for me to share some distraught thoughts on the current relations between art and politics, art and violence, art and religion, with such noted persons as those that are now here assembled, and in the context of the exhibition that is so enticingly announced by the list of the artificers that are about to be included in it. What I will first do here is apologize, offer you some apologies, all related to my bad language. That language is English, of course, but I was severely admonished not to deliver my talk in Spanish. And I'm afraid that what I will now present you is a rather insomniac translation, further affected by the accent factor. But as Jerónimo Duarte Riascos once consoled me, bad English is the language of the future. I suppose, at least in that respect, I might be considered avant-garde. I beg of you, bear too with a certain oddity in my language, for I promise it will be redeemed by the images, the power of these images, which is that of the rest, the vestige, the relic, the poetics of the remains. I find the torsions of language peculiarly suited to the institution that is so generously hosting us, this being the J College of Correctional Justice, and thus intimately associated with the idea of the forensic. Art history, art theory may often have a disquieting link with the forensic, for they also work with a posthumous consideration of the evidence in order to bring the corpse back to a certain form of life, the afterlife of images. And the ghost in the trace. The crucial link between the forensic and the theological. For in the very end, the very notion of correctional justice must return us to the eternal issue of the salvation of our immortal soul, one of the few things that still matter in our God-forsaken day and age. No, please go on with the video again. What you've been seeing in the background, and you will again see now, is a particular work I will not be discussing because it is impossible to render justice to its complexity in this contained format. But this is one of the prime materials that are in the very theoretical grounding of the concept of a poetics of the remains. In fact, Micromuseum, which is an alternative museum I try to conduct in Lima, is currently exhibiting a joint show of Maya Watanabe's videos and Giancarlo Scaglia's peculiar installations. Can you go back to the video? Why is it? The poetics of the remains is an attempt to conceive a category that will allow us to construct an analytical cut into the ample and dispersed artistic production under the broad impact of the capitalist revolution that disrupts all since the year 2000 in Peru. This category is an attempt to start to name and relate a rosary of very diverse works produced by artificers with neither personal nor professional relations that link them, but articulated in this theoretical gaze to a certain horizon of the times, a shared structure of feeling defined by three essential conditions. First, a deferred effect of violence, a traumatic experience that is neither past nor present, but vaguely recent. A tragedy no longer contemporary, but latent within us. A still personal memory, but with a growing critical distance that slowly harbors the construction of a melancholic sentiment in regards to the enigma and the trauma of that history that demands to be sublimated. The fundamentalist ultra-violence that permeates and corrodes the Peruvian Weimar Republic between 1980 and 1992. The competition of horrors between subversive terrorism and the terrorism of the state. In beholding that tragedy somewhat from afar, the artworks that I'm trying to decipher work not out of political commitment, but from poetical doubt. Second, a sensibility marked not by a position taken, but by the melancholy contemplation of the ruin. Ruins no longer current, and yet all too present. Third, the transubstantiation of that structure of feeling into a structure of language, marked by the prevalence of the indexical, in complementary opposition to the iconic and the symbolic, in terms of the essential typology elaborated by Charles Sanders Peirce. More on that later. In order to explore the possibilities of these theoretical intuitions, I will here dwell on barely one group of works. Barely one group of works, all very related to the massacre of El Frontón, a prison island visible from the coastline of Lima, where more than 100 militants of the subversive sect Shining Path were bombed out and the survivors shot and killed after an attempted jailhouse rebellion in 1986. The paper I'm about to read has a title, Posthumous, 3 indexical notes on the poetics of the remains in Giancarlo Scaglia. Introito. With the culminating production of Stellar, the Peruvian artificer Giancarlo Scaglia installs amongst us a perturbation of disquieting relevance, almost a memento mori, a moral reminder of our mortality. A memento mori for contemporary Peru, immersed in the multiple joys and trances of the capitalist revolution that so radically transforms and distorts everything amongst us since the beginning of the millennium. An imaginary of infinite prosperities, yet haunted by the latency of the grand and harrowing violence experienced not so long ago, and still not extinct. Perhaps an incisive sign of it all is the growing evidence in the Peruvian arts of an emotion inscribed by the poetics of the remains and by the politics of the indexical. Both are categories with which I attempt to begin to name a certain new horizon of works conceived from the contemplation and the activation of the ruin. A ruin that is all too contemporary. It is with the material vestiges of our uncivil war that artificers such as Scaglia, but not only him, brought into the sensitive register of all that has been devastated by our recent history, all too recent and repressed. That is the alternative eloquence I am interested in exercising out of the grave objectuality, the dire material conditions of the esoteric designs which Scaglia configures with elements dislocated from the ruins of El Frontón. Not what they illustrate, but what they evidence and what they poetize. Radically. An alternative semiosis, an alternate construction of meaning emerges out of the debris thus resurrected. Disconnected fragments, disarticulated from the continuum that once made sense out of them, but now obliquely active in our unconscious, and from there, active too in the very structure of that distinct expression that is struggling to take form. No doubt, this is one of the major challenges for artistic reflection, to unravel how a structure of feeling, becomes a structure of language and of history. 1. Text. Molds, fragments, remains. Perhaps it is in their very structure, material and linguistic, that we should search for the intrinsic truth, with a capital T, the intrinsic truth in these works with which Scaglia defies us now. Dislocated pieces of the once prison island of El Frontón, the stage and site for one of the paradigmatic massacres that convulsed our Peruvian Weimar Republic, the brief democratic experience ransacked by economic delirium and apocalyptic political violence during the 1980s. An all too contemporary ruin, inhabited now only by a solitude that is also a desolation, and undoubtedly marked by horror, but also, in a more melancholy way, by abandon, with its exploded architectures crumbling down amongst the humidity and the birds' defecations. Una isla guanera, as we say in Peru, a guano island where geography and history condensed in a shared abyss. History and geography, both repressed by various censorships and self-censorships. Under the twilight of this multiple darkening, any and all construction of meaning must invert its terms. The basal, the primordial question is no longer what these ruins signify, but how do we signify those ruins? How do we inscribe and extract meaning into them, out of them, and how, in that process, we ourselves become re-signified? Without necessarily intending to do so, Scaglia's answers remit us to certain critical origins of semiology, the science of science, elaborately theorized by Charles Sanders Peirce during the late 19th century. The keen distinction between what design offers as representation, the iconic, or incorporates as a trace, the indexical, and their complex integration into the general conventions of a shared communication, the symbolic. If I want to offer an image of my hand and I attempt to draw it on site, that would be iconic. But if I dip it in ink or in dirt or in shit, as a child would do, and imprinted on a paper, that would be indexical. And if that trace becomes the meaning of and if that trace becomes an emblematic meaning, then we are entering the notion of the symbolic. There is thus a sophisticated logical operation throwing in these artistic doings, a complexity all more suggestive for the fact that it does not derive from a pure analytical will, but out of the poetic intuition of an other sense lost amongst those marks and fragments. The involuntary artistic insight of how some sapience or truth remains there inscribed and encrypted and deciphered. Interpretation is, for Peirce, an act inserted into the very fact of signification, to the point of incorporating the interpreter in the very structure of design. In selecting and classifying and displacing those remains from El Frontón, Scaglia turns immediate static objects into dynamic objects, the agents of a continuous semiosis, a chain of signs that envelop us, the spectators, until our transformation is complete. That sapience was already ours, but we had it lulled and censored, deadened. To learn is to remember, is to awaken. The Platonic anamnesia, the anti-amnesia. 2. Context. The truth contained by these remains and liberated by these works is the repressed memory of all that is precipitated in them, as material matter and as lived history. As the shining path turned El Frontón into one of the privileged stages for its fundamentalist liturgies, that hallowed prison house accumulated essential testimonies of the grotesque transfiguration of communist visual rhetorics. In its walls and courtyards, ideology becomes teratology, the science of monstrosity. And both become posthumous allegories through the underlying evidences found under the debris to which that prison was reduced by the ultra-violence of the bombing with which the state repressed the fanatical, suicidal jailhouse rebellion of June 18, 1986. A night of pure war, in which 3 Marines were killed and more than 100 inmates perished, many of them murdered after having been surrendered. The corpses of those victims were disappeared, but there remain the impressive material rests of that mythical prison, which are also the remainders of our modern republic torn asunder. Thus, it was perceived by various artificers, such as Jesus Ruiz Duran, whom from the very first moment worked with the journalistic documentation of that tragedy. And in the last few years, some of these artificers have defied obsolete prohibitions by crossing the narrow strait of seawater that separates the island from Lima in order to disembark their own gaze amongst the factual ruins, with results as impressive as the pioneer photographs obtained by Gladys Alvarado Jordi in 2009. This photograph and the previous ones are all taken by Gladys Alvarado. A certain threshold was being crossed in that gesture. A geographical threshold, no doubt, even an existential one, but above all, a semiotic threshold. The hiatus, the seizure, the gap that separates and links representation and presence, or absence. 3. Subtext, or absence. In that ambiguous breach, Scaglia raises all stakes by defining the materiality of his work in the physical presence of that ruin, and no longer solely in its representation. with the additional density provided by the vital experience, his own, that sustains that artistic decision. And its sidereal, its cosmic projection. Scaglia established his atelier in the wrecked jailhouse and intermittently slept amongst the rubble for 2 years. At first, he painted some powerfully somber landscapes, marinas, with hybrid pigments contaminated by precious metals introduced to enhance the auratic hues and suggestions announced by the very titles chosen for those dramatic pictures. Silver or golden. But even more distinctive are the remains that Scaglia selects as factual sculptures or for abstract installations, and also as matrices for the thick imprinting of those shot-through surfaces, their bullet impacts and traces transferred with dense black pigments into enormous white sheets made of cotton paper. The daunting negative of the perforations left by the shrapnel in the walls of the refectory, the guards' dining room, where the surrendered prisoners were aligned on top of the tables in order to facilitate their summary execution, as is illustrated by one of Scaglia's allusive drawings. Please pay special attention to the also religious connotations of the plastic results. Thus blackened, these walls now stand out amongst the ruins as rotund tombstones, visible from the ocean and from the sky, from the waters and the heavens. And the lugubrious prints offer themselves to our gaze almost as burial clothes, funerary cloaks, an evocation multiple and exorbitant of the holy shroud, multiplied perhaps 33 times, with all types of variants and combinations. Combinations and variants that in a recent exhibition we managed to assemble in a sort of mortuary, a funerary room, not exempt, however, of messianic connotations. Such suggestions are all the more intense for the fact that they derive from a process of inscriptions rather than descriptions, exceptional manifestations of the indexical rather than the iconic, but with results that are disturbingly symbolic. Disturbances that have been given a cosmic projection. Stellar is the sidereal name given to these pieces. And constellations is the denomination chosen for the virtual drawing on the gallery floors obtained by the simple distribution of random elements extracted from the island in a relation proportionally exact to their original placement. Feathers, bones, warp cans and metal pieces, dynamited fragments of the prison's architecture, all shown as the disjecta membra, the body in pieces of a shooting star or a fallen angel. Their orderly dispersion traces imaginary geometries that are also celestial, almost sublime, with the tragically terrestrial remains of our immediate past. But here, elevated over the transparency of grand horizontal platforms made of glass and placed beneath the firmament of graphic shrouds. The installation thus proposed an intuitive rhyme between the debris and the trace, and between both and astral charts in their most angelical projections. Scaglia associated the aleatory dispersion of the bullets and the fragments with the stellar conjunctions sighted on the firmament over the prison island, GPS defined, the technological gaze of God. Of all the gods, as we know, there is no such thing as chance. El azar no existe. And there is a cosmic meaning to be inferred by the fact that the principal installation thus produced by Scaglia coincides with the orbit of Orion. Orion, the grand hunter, who in Greek mythology threatens to depredate all animal life on Earth. An overflow of hubris, of arrogance run berserk, that Gaia, the Mother Earth, manages to contain by murdering that delirium with the support of Scorpio. In commemoration of that cosmic drama, the victim and its slayer are elevated to the firmament, and from that eternity they contemplate the all too human, all too terrestrial reiteration of their stellar struggle. As in the infinite Peruvian violence, Scaglia delineates in space the linear void of that warrior constellation with the molten lead extracted from the bullet shells found scattered in the ruins of El Frontón. A poetical astronomy that becomes a political astrology, esoteric and existential, to walk amongst the ruins that are the sky, a fallen heaven. The fatherland's land and landscape radically intertwined. The ruin returned to nature, and from there, reinserted in history. Broken history. One of Scaglia's most poignant works consists of the bare exposure of the fragments of the Peruvian coat of arms, sculpted out of stone decades ago and now found in pieces, close to what must have been the foundational monument of that prison house. A truncated geometrical structure with perhaps pre-Hispanic connotations. A pyramid, but also a pedestal, now suggestively empty. 4 minor obelisks surround it, and following amongst them, the artificer recuperated the mutilated foundation stone that is inscribed with the names of President Augusto B. Leguía and the correctional authorities during the self-entitled Patria Nueva, New Fatherland, a regime that during the 1920s attempted to refound the republic through multiple modernization policies that included the penitentiary system through edifications such as those of El Frontón. After 11 euphoric years, however, that project would not survive its own contradictions and the contradictions of the times. Peru entered then, in 1930, into a period of brutal internal strife that is somehow echoed by the disasters of the uncivil war initiated by Maoist fundamentalists in 1980. The construction and the destruction of El Frontón thus demarcates both the extremes and the tragic reversion of the dreams of order and progress in our failed state. A damned subtext that both politics and the law, with capital P, with capital L, both politics and the law repress and bury. But art exhumes, disinterrs. New archaeologies of design, conceived from the very rupture and the negation of communicative action and of language itself. That shared, common, communitarian language that was never fully given to us. To this aphasia, Scaglia responds with an extreme gnosis, a poiesis that is absolute, but also vulnerable. The poetics, not of the epic or the lyrical, but of the rest, the trace, the incision, the fracture, the remains. Remainders turned into reminders. Everything indexical in which our postmodernity reveals, excavates a posthumous modernity. Coda, afterward. The indexical, Charles Sanders Peirce warned us, also encompasses the cyclic relationship between the murderer and the victim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. That was so amazing. I just wanted to tell everybody that the artist, Giancarlo Scaglia, that Gustavo talked about, is here with us this afternoon and is going to be in our next panel. Our next panel is going to be with the artists. They are on exhibition. They are here in New York, so it's going to be also a fabulous panel. Gustavo, I think we don't have a lot of time, and I'm sure everybody is, I mean, a lot of people must have questions for you since it's such an opportunity to have you with us here. So I would open the floor for the public if anybody has any question instead of taking the time. Vanessa, we need the mic. Where's Vanessa? We need the mic for everybody who wants to make a question. So Gabriela has a question. So let's start here in the front.
Thank you, Gustavo. Very nice text. Terse. I have a question about the relationship indexical between Milagros de la Torres, Los Pasos Perdidos, and what I just saw from Scaglia. Thank you.
First, just out of curiosity, does anybody here does not speak English? Everybody, I'm sorry, speak Spanish. Does anybody here not speak Spanish? Okay. We had an interchange of opinions on the matter. Yes, of course. Los Pasos Perdidos could be an early primordial example of the exertions of the indexical the indexical drive, that's the term, la pulsión indiciaria, the indexical drive in Peruvian art. And it is no coincidence that it is so related to the strife and the trauma which I have been discussing here through other works. Photography in itself is already essentially indexical, because photography does not represent, it captures a luminous trace. But what's interesting there is that not only does she use that indexical medium, but she uses it to register indexical evidences of that harrowing violence. She, for those of you who do not know that particular piece by Milagros, she photographs the relics, some would call them the evidences, of specific criminal actions, particularly of a political nature. A shirt perforated by bullets, a Maoist flag tattered. So in that specific line of work, she doubles the ante. She exerts an indexical gaze on the indexical evidence of the violence we are here discussing. Again, I must argue that there is something particularly revealing in the fact that so many crucial artificers of the Peruvian scene in the last years have dwelled into indexical medium without being particularly related amongst themselves. That is, for me, very significant, because it points to the fact that we are here now not dealing with deliberate and conscious aesthetic statement, but with something far more profound and transcendent, which is a cultural transformation of the times. This is a horizon. It's not the only cultural horizon now dominant in Peru, but it is increasingly a poignant and predominant one. And that certainly must mean several things. One of them, I hope, is that Peru is finally starting its long postponed mourning. It's work of mourning, el trabajo de duelo. Work of mourning is work of mourning in English, which would eventually allow us to accept and process the terrible legacy of that extreme violence we had to endure.
Any other questions? Yeah,
So I really enjoyed the talk. I have a question, it's more metacritical about sort of how you are thinking about your own approach to the works. Because at the beginning, you said that you were trying to come to a category that would cut through capitalism. So in a sense, it seems as that, or insert a cut in capitalism, something like this. That you were trying to come to a category, that there was a kind of conceptual extraction that you were trying to operate or bring about through these readings. And so it came to mind other sort of works of crisis, right? Like the concept of the political, the concept of the Enlightenment, right? That kind of mirror the context that you're talking about. So I guess the question, and so, you know, if Horkheimer and Adorno talk about allegory, you talk about the index, right? If their sort of favored logic of representation is that, yours is the index. I guess the question is if you could just speculate a bit about the way you're thinking about the ends of your own work, right? The objective of in what sense do you consider the sort of critical discourse that you're generating? Does it function at a conceptual level? Is it more of a kind of performance of this impossibility to sublimate that you constantly sort of go back to?
Thank you. If I understand you correctly, you're asking me about the purpose of my case, which I would rephrase in terms of the emotion of my approach, because I deeply believe in the emotional commitment of the critical gaze on the artistic subject. What I try to do is become existentially involved with the artistic process in establishing shared links with the distraught recent history we all experience in Peru. I should point out that I probably did not express myself as clearly as I should. What I did in a passing comment was just to contextualize the economic contradiction in which these peculiar artistic manifestations are brought forth. And I spoke of a capitalist revolution, which is a paradoxical but crucial term, I believe, to come to terms with the perhaps irreversible transformation of Peruvian culture since at least the year 2000. And I will not get into the sociological details of it all. But what I'm trying to say is that there is a structure of feeling that is now substantially, distinctly differentiated from what has dominated the cultural ethos, or the most prevalent cultural ethos in Peru during the previous century, in fact, because it's incredible how the year 2000 marks such a specific and exact calendar for these political and emotional transformations. So the poetics of the remains go against the grain of this of the hedonism of this the current economic and social times in Peruvian culture, but they do so not by harking back, as other artificers do, to the emblems and the fantasies and the utopias of a lost radicalism, but rather by attempting to finally process the complex gravity of what has struck us. I'll say it in another manner. We are finally recognizing the reality of defeat. And that, I think, is a crucial psychological and cultural operation in order to grow out of that dire situation. We must recognize defeat in order to turn it into experience. And that, in some ways, is the work of mourning, in Freudian terms. And that is what these artificers are, most of them unconsciously, doing. And for me, it's beautiful that this processing is unconscious. I mean, it's probable that none of them, or almost none of them, are acquainted with most of the categories I brought forth here, the idea of the indexical, the very name of pairs. I mean, it would be wildly esoteric for them, as for so many others. And that's wildly beautiful because it speaks of the authenticity of this structure of feeling. It is not a programmatic posture in art and politics. It's not a poetics that subdues its own callings to the demands of politics. Rather, politics are here submitted to the inner prompting of an expressive need. And for me, that's one of the few things that still retain a certain seduction in my involvement with art. I truly think we have to leave art, but that's another matter. I mean, the savage hope that it is still possible to conceive and even practice an art of inner prompting. The poetics of the remains, for me, are a luminous, yet also frail example of this.
We have one more question. I'll have two more. That's it. So we start here, then we go to you, and then we'll be it.
Okay.
Thank you. Just wanted to know, you were talking about, there's two things that really interested me.
I'm sorry, can you
You're
identify
talking,
yourself, please?
Maristela Veraste, nice to meet you. I really know little about art, mostly about literature, and I was really interested in two things that you brought forth, which were, one, the implications of crime scene processing and all the forensic aspect, the implications of the similarities with a crime scene and the processing of a crime scene, the forensic aspect of it on the one hand, and on the other hand, the part about the liturgical implications, and both of them,
I love the last phrase.
the liturgical implications.
The liturgical.
Yes.
Yes.
So I was interested in, when you talk about a poetics of the remains, do you also see a poetics of presence? Because both the liturgical and the forensic...
A poetics of presence?
Presence. I'm thinking about Jean-Luc Nancy, I'm thinking about Gombrich, and you know, all the production of presence philosophy, where you're bringing forth a presence of somebody who's no longer there, either by a liturgical act or by the processing of something where that person used to be, probably violently murdered in this case, or anyway, a poetics of trying to bring forth that presence in those acts, liturgical and forensical acts.
Fascinating. To begin with, of course, there are complex issues, even practical ones, related to the artistic involvement with the crime scene. But this is a crime, this is the scene of a crime that is not recognized as such. We have passed 3 decades, 1986, 3 decades, almost to the day. 30 years have passed, and no judiciary procedures have been able to be successful in bringing those truly responsible of those terrible acts to due process of the law, under the due process of the law. There are very obvious reasons for this. The president involved was Alan Garcia, who became president again a few years ago and is still very much a live and powerful political actor in the Peruvian scene. So the judiciary front in this struggle for memory is not yet lost, but it is stilled. I mean, somehow this entire island could be considered a still life, a stilled life, if you allow a poor English pun. And this is an island of memory with time not quite frozen, because it is continuously being eroded and transformed by nature itself. What's fascinating is that the defeat of history, the tragedy of politics, have returned the island to nature. I have had several disquieting conversations with Scaglia, with the limits of what you can, with the ethical but also aesthetic limits of what you can do in such a particularly charged context. And we have arrive to no definite answers. It is an open question. I am accompanying that process in an anguished and at the same time expectant manner. The broken, the fractured Peruvian coat of arms, such a powerful fragment of our lived history, has now become one of the most powerful artistic statements of current times. There is a tension there, a peculiar dialectics with arguments both for and against such handlings and such dealings. This work is now being exhibited at Micromuseo in a show that is called The Poetics of the Remains, that attempts to relate the Maya Watanabe's splendid videos that I have not had a chance to talk about with Giancarlo's interventions. And it was only at the very last moment that we decided to permit the utilization of this specific remnants. It is not lightly that we take such decisions, or that we make such decisions. And, but it is not lightly that we have lived everything that we had to experience. And the word experience becomes, again, crucial for me. You know? We are trying to turn defeat into experience. And in order to do that, we have to pasar la página, go over the page. Turn the page, we have to turn the page. Paradoxically enough, we have to turn the page in order to recognize what was inscribed in it. It's almost as if the act of censorship on that forbidden book of history blanks out the text, the context, the subtext, only from the front. And when you turn the page, suddenly, magically, you can see all that was erased, only that, of course, it will be an inverted figure, as this very coat of arms.
Okay. And our really last question here.
Thank you for that question. You have inspired me. And I think there was another question implied. I'm sorry. Yeah, next one. Okay.
Gustavo.
Continue doing the opening later tonight, okay? After the symposium.
Juliana.
Hi. You have talked about these horizons in the Peruvian art, about that deal with the poetics of
About
the
what?
remains. That deal with the poetics of the remains, what
Yeah.
you have called the poetics of the remains. How much do you think that it deals as well with slot in the international market and the institutional, in the requirement to deal with the political coming from Latin American countries, these poetics of the remains?
How much? Everything.
Not how much, but
Todo. Todo. Well, we should engrave in gold and platinum on the entrance, on the grand entrance of the art world, the words, how would you say it in English? Forsaken all hope, all those who enter here. Abandon all hope, all those who enter here. I mean, art is but a glimmer. It's a wink. It's a fleeting illusion destined to be enslaved by the seduction of capital. And that is why I found it so necessary to at least mention the fact that these haunting works come out of a capitalist revolution. I was not trying to point an harmony, but a tension, because art lives out of tension, doesn't it? So, this very talk is probably, in the long term, a betrayal of that which it is trying to vindicate, comprehend. Such is the perverse logic of the system we have so foolishly committed our lives to. That is why I said a few minutes ago that perhaps there is no more urgent, radical need in radical art than the very act of living art. And savaging other actually lived experiences of culture that can acquire a truly lasting meaning and transcendence. And of course, I am here talking of the other crucial tension, which I tried to point out in my introduction. Because we talk perhaps too much of art and politics and not enough of art and religion. And religion has now become, this is paradoxical, an extremely political and urgent matter. And I'm not just thinking of the entire Middle Eastern tragedy, etc. I'm thinking of our common, everyday, commodified lives in the Western world, the so-called Western world. We need to go back to an art that restores the need in us of becoming concerned with the salvation of our immortal soul. In fact, I would say there is no more current and radical rhythm list for a contemporary artificer than the Spanish mystics of the 16th century. San Juan de la Cruz, Santa Teresa de Jesús, muero porque no muero. I won't attempt to translate that. I die because I do not die. English impoverishes everything. I mean, why do you demand me to speak in English? I mean, to speak in a language where you cannot distinguish between ser and star. I would actually say, argue here, I'm becoming motivated again, I'll finish, that the poetics of the remains have to do with the recognition and the reparation of that linguistic separation between ser and star. How can you explain that in English?
Everybody, we're going to ask for 5 minutes to set the next panel with the artists in the exhibition, so please go get some refreshments, and in 5 minutes we'll come back, okay? Thank you so much again.
¿Cómo te llamas? Susana Ovalar. ¿Y te dedicas a? Te doy mi tarjeta. Te doy mi tarjeta y con gusto me escribes. Esto será publicado en algún momento y vemos la manera de que llegue a tus manos. Fernando, tengo que venir hasta Nueva York para verte. Ay, muy bien, hombre. Mira, tenemos el mismo look. Alguien nos tiene que sacar una foto. Sí. Buhari ¿no? Era el personaje de el único Carmen Sacno. A ti no te voy a contar el cuento.
Lo que sí me gustaría pasar a mí.
¿Me vas a poner a hablar de primero?
No, nadie va a ponerse a hablar de primero, no te preocupes.
Cuidado, pues.
¿Dónde?
Pero Isabela me dijo.
Mira, yo estoy sentada ahí porque tengo que traducir a Juan. Acá, ok. Y me faltan 2 sillas.
Isabela se va a sentar aquí para protegernos a los que nos están mostrando. Sí.
Ya, van a traer 2 sillas más.
Aquí tienes una, mira. Aquí tienes una.
No, está abierta.
Nos arrimamos todos. Todo el mundo quiere el lado tuyo, ¿viste?
Bueno, pero vamos a arrimar.
I'll get one chair. Who else is, well, Yucef, sit down, hi Yucef.
And we're missing Giancarlo.
One more chair.
Quiero saber el nombre de este señor porque quiero
Where are
decir
you sitting,
eso.
Yucef? Where are you sitting? I don't know. You're gonna sit here? Is that in there in order or is that it? No, yeah, where's Martinat?
Martinat is talking. Martinat is arriving later, the same as Scaglia. If they come, they'll sit down and then they talk. Scaglia, that's Scaglia. Martinat is the one that I'm saying. Martinat, but he has to leave for a meeting and he's trying to make it the same as Iván Argote.
And Argote's not here too. But
Es el libro de estaba hablando.
Mitad, sí. Sí, espectacular. Sí, es lindo, ¿verdad?
¿Se conseguirá?
¿Y quieres? ¿Ganado de Juan o algo? Yo tengo que estar. Bueno, no, es que estamos todos.
Okay, we're going to start because we're a little bit short of time. So if everyone could sit down, please. Okay. No importa, no te angusties.
Sí, sí. Está.
Okay, so I'm going to start because we're a little bit short of time. My name's Isabela Villanueva. I'm one of the curators of the exhibition we're opening tonight downstairs called Basta. And as you know, we have a slight change to the program, but we're very fortunate enough to have today the possibility to talk with some of the artists that are exhibiting, presenting works in the show below. And so the exhibition we're presenting the works of 14 Latin American artists: Iván Argote, who should try to join us later, who's from Colombia; Marcelo Cidade from Brazil; Regina Galindo, Guatemala; Aníbal Lopez, also from Guatemala; Teresa Margolles from Mexico, who will be joining us for the opening; José Carlos Martinat from Peru, who will try to join us later sometime in the panel as well; Yucef Merhi, who's here on the far left; Miceli, who's unfortunately in Sweden, I believe, so couldn't come today; Mondongo here, Manuel, Mendanha, and Laffitte, and Juliana. Morris from Mexico, Armando Ruiz, Giancarlo Scaglia, Javier Téllez, and Juan Toro. So what we're going to do is we're going to present in the PowerPoint a couple of images of each one of the artists that we're presenting downstairs, and we're going to give them the microphone so they can very briefly talk about the work. and then we're going to open for questions for you to be able to talk to them, which I think is like the most interesting thing here. So we're going to start, I think, with Juan. I want to say that Juan will try his best with Spanish, with English, and I'll try and translate whatever if he needs anything. But what we're exhibiting below is his series called Plomos, which could be translated to leads. And okay, so here's Juan.
Hi. The most important part of my work is the objects, because through the objects I approach to the violence. For me, it's very important to show the violence, not showing the corpse or the traces, blood, or something like that. Because my experience, when I approach in my country, Venezuela, this way, the people turn the face and look another side. But this way, the people approach to the piece, and in a moment when they're están suficientemente cerca, when it's close enough, the people began to talk with the object, because this object I found in the crime scenes and took and take the photos on the studio, because my interest is to out of the thing of this of the crime scene, because the crime scene, the object is loud, you know. ¿Sí? Cuando lo saco de la escena del crimen, lo descontextualizo.
So once these are all bullets that are taken from cadavers and that he recovers from the morgue, taking out of corpses. So what he is trying to do is recontextualize the bullets and give them like a different meaning.
Yeah. Entonces las personas pueden empezar a dialogar con la violencia desde otro punto de vista.
So people can actually dialogue with violence with a different point of view.
Y pueden tener una aproximación diferente. En Venezuela, la violencia es algo que ocurre de todos los días en un número importante.
So people can have this is difficult. So people can have an approximation because of the large numbers of violent acts in Venezuela happening every day.
Y las personas, al poder dialogar, empiezan a entender un poco más el tema de la violencia desde el punto de vista, no desde la página roja, sino desde el objeto que causa el daño a la muerte, pues.
I forgot how to. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. I suck as a translator. I apologize. But basically, it's a way of contextualizing the object that causes all this violence, so people can approach it on a different level.
Y la gente puede entender la violencia desde otro punto de vista.
And people can understand violence from a different point of view.
Una violencia que vivimos todos los días. En Venezuela muere por causas violentas 2 personas, casi 3 personas por hora.
So, one person dies every approximately 3 hours in Venezuela. Oh, sorry. So a person dies in Venezuela approximately. Oh, sorry. 3 people die every hour. Wow. Okay, that's unfortunate. Yeah.
Y estas municiones comienzan de alguna manera a hablar de la cantidad de armas y de municiones que circulan libremente en la calle.
So basically, these photos are talking about they also refer to the amount of guns and arms that are on the streets and are used violently every day in crimes.
El año pasado, el gobierno reconoció 17.500 homicidios.
So the Venezuelan government acknowledged last year 17,000 murders?
Sí.
Yes, 17,000 murders.
Pero esa estadística se queda corta porque hay que agregarle resistencia a la autoridad, que suman alrededor de 5.000 más.
So that actual number is not truthful, because you would have to add like 5,000 extra homicides or murders that attend to the, what is it? The
Resistencia a la autoridad.
resistance to authority. So basically when people are, between policemen or guards.
En cada hecho, en cada homicidio, en cada muerte, se usan alrededor entre 5 y 10 municiones.
So in every shooting, there's
Homicide.
in every homicide there is approximately 5 to 10 bullets.
5 to 10
From 5 to 10
bullets
shot.
But si tú multiplicas eso, 22.000 por 5, te da alrededor de 108.000 municiones.
Okay, but if you multiply 22,000 by 5, that gives you how much?
108.000 más o menos.
108,000 shots fired. So
Que se usaron en hechos violentos el año pasado.
that were used in violent crimes last year.
El 10% de esas municiones cobraron la vida de gente por balas perdidas.
So 10% of those shots were actual lost stray bullets. I'm sorry for the terminology here, not very accurate.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to ask briefly, and then we can start with the other artists, because this is one of the photographic series that Juan has been working on, but he also has other works. Another very interesting piece that he has is an installation made with the tags of all the corpses recovered from the morgue in Venezuela. And he recently exhibited that at the Maxul, which is a museum in Zulia, in Venezuela. And so it was installed all throughout the room, were the tags, the black tags recovered from the morgue of all the corpses. Do you want to talk a little bit about that series as well?
En el año 2009 el gobierno dio más estadísticas y yo comencé a buscar la forma de buscar números para poder hablar del número de homicidios.
So since 2009, the Venezuelan government hasn't been very open or hasn't given the correct numbers in the death toll, so he started searching independently into that.
En la morgue principal de Caracas entran aproximadamente 550 cuerpos.
So in the main morgue in Venezuela, how many?
550.
550 corpses arrive every day.
Month.
Oh, a month, sorry.
Y el 80% de esos ingresos son muertes violentas.
80% of the corpses that enter that morgue are due to violent death, crimes.
Yeah. Y las etiquetas habla de esos números.
So the tags, that installation that he did, basically refers to those violent crimes.
Tengo cerca de 1.000 desde el año 2009 hasta el 2016.
So from 2009 until now, 2016, he's been recovering and collecting all these tags from the morgue. Well, thank you. And well, here on the screen we have a couple of the bullets, which basically one of the very interesting thing about them is that they honestly don't appear to be bullets because of the trajectory and how they've been lodged into, the bodies of the victims. They really don't seem at first to be bullets. And if you look closely, you can find little drops of blood or even skin on them, which is, very horrifying when you think about it. Okay, so now we're gonna go with, I guess, to my right, Giancarlo, who we've known a little of his work after Gustavo's presentation, but he is also gonna talk briefly about Stellar and other things.
Okay, sorry for my English. With the help of Isabela, maybe we could make it better. Talk after Gustavo, it's a little bit complicated because I don't know. Well, thanks, Gustavo, first for your investigation about my work. Well, I started to visit this island 4 years ago, and I created my studio there, just starting to paint. Should we? Please, just 2 seconds. As Gustavo said, this is an abandoned island, and I started looking this place just for one reason, because I was looking for a place that the 360, 100 degrees are the similar, the equal landscape, no? They are all sea and
So he was
sky.
looking for a place where he could have sort of like 360 degrees of visibility, so that's how he came across this island.
No, it's a landscape that doesn't never change, but know all the history that this island passed in the last 30 years. Well, in the second year, I started to saw the architecture of this place, and I started to recognize the bullet on the holes, and I start to think about these walls telling me a history. No, from the beginning of the humanity, we saw the stars to know about our past and our future.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay,
it's
great.
very clear. Yeah.
And yeah, from the beginning of the humanity, we was looking for to know about our past and our future, and we start to use the mural to tell our history, no, our present, our future, and that's why I was looking, and I start to found a way to transform these murals, these bullet holes on the walls, in constellations, in maps, historical maps about what happened in that island. And well, that's the work, no? For me, it's like a map, historical map to know about our past and our future.
Do you mind if I ask you something? Because you're very interested in the past of your country. So this is not the first time that you take a historical event. You also worked on a series called Infierno en Chorrillos.
Yeah, the thing is, I am 34 years old. I was very child when the civil war was running on my country, and my approach to this historical moment and political moment is very, I think it's very decontextualized, you know, because I was just a child in this.
So you actually didn't experience it properly, but
yes,
more through.
That I want that I'm trying always, or I'm investigated by, is to recontextualize. Took all these events of political violence and trying to put it in my own personal view as how I assimilate this history.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like Gustavo was saying, the remains. It's the poetics of the remains that you're dealing with, right?
That's why, for example, I start to work with the rest from the destroyed buildings, and I start to make like a catalogation. No, like an archive.
You're cataloging.
I'm cataloging the stones, the rest, just to give life. No, again, it's like when I took these elements and I catalog all of this, we start to have new definitions of archive or
of archives, yeah.
Yes, of archive. No, it's like give new life to this, or new lectures to this rest.
And you mentioned to me once when we were talking that the first time that you exhibited these works, a person who actually survived.
Yeah, that was very, very strong moment actually, because in the first time that we present this project from the public.
You showed it at the Sala Miro Quesadas in Lima, right? So the first time that after he created this work, the first time that he was exhibited in the public during the opening?
Yeah, and it was amazing because one of the survivors of the island was there, and he recognized all the paintings because it's the most easy to recognize. You know, it's like a kind of painting, realistic. And when I asked him why he survived, he told me just because press arrived.
Because I don't know if everyone's aware, this is an island where basically all the inmates, it was a prison, and basically all the inmates were people who had belonged to the Sendero Luminoso. And there was a riot inside the prison. And basically what happened is most of the inmates were executed and killed by the guards. So basically very few people survived. And as Gustavo mentioned, all the corpses disappeared. So there's been very little that has remained of this horrifying act. So, you know, it was very surprising that you encountered
and
something.
it was because the press people arrived not to record.
Yeah, so they couldn't basically kill him because the press was there.
Yeah, it's just for that.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No,
or?
okay.
Okay. Well, they're beautiful, beautiful paintings, which you can see. They're downstairs in the entrance. And then I'm gonna give the microphone to Manuel and Juliana from Mondongo.
Well, we have two works on this exhibition from different series. One talks directly of violence. It's a seascape or riverscape from the Rio de la Plata, because we have a dictatorship government during the 70s and the 80s in Argentina, and during this period, the government killed 30,000 people and threw the corpse to the Rio de la Plata. And one of the pieces is an altar piece that talks about that because it's painted with trash bags. And it's a metaphor of our contemporary life also for us, because when we close it, you can see a strike of the garbage workers. And it's a metaphor and a parallel between these two sides of our history. It touches me very close because my fathers were left-handed subversive guerrilla guys, and most of his friends were killed. Then we decided to do this piece. And the other piece that we have in the exhibition is more metaphorical. It's about our series of skulls, and Juliana is going to read something about it.
Yes. I'm going to read because our English is bad, but well, as Gustavo said, bad English is the language of the, we are all avant-garde, no? Well, skull. We have taken the skull as a container and as an element that unifies the human race. We all have a skull. The skull is for us a medium to talk about our society, looking at the past and the present and envisioning the futures. We put the same effort in the micro as in the macro aspect of the skull. We believe that both levels must be inextricably united. We work in this piece inspired in some way by the endless flow of information in which we are immersed since globalization and the appearing of the internet. All this information is impossible to apprehend. Our mind is hit by multiple and simultaneous realities. What we tried with this series was to approach this virtual reality from a handmade physical world with many human labor hours dedicated to a single fragment. This virtual reality suffocates us, but at the same time, it gives us endless possibilities of knowledge. Our culture is a culture of narcotization through electronic opiaceous, drugs, and automatized behaviors that reproduce globally. This culture manifests through shopping malls, television, advertisement, the force of information. It becomes very difficult not to feel that you are being raped in a way or another. It becomes very difficult to escape from the paranoia of seeing wolves everywhere. And it is almost impossible to avoid getting numbed by electronic media that function like a kind of virtual morphine. Finally, it is always about death or destruction under some disguise.
So I also wanted to ask you briefly, because this is not the first time that you're dealing, you usually try to portray in your works issues that are arising in Argentina. So I think there's also a very famous work that you guys did called República de los Niños.
Sí,
So if you could...
it calls El sueño de la razón. It talks about gender violence. because gender violence is a great topic in Argentina. There's a great movement now that is called Ni Una Menos now, that
No,
not
one
one
less,
less,
not one less,
less,
not one
but
less.
in feminine woman, no? And we have done this series about a rape and a crime that appears in, the body appears in the República de los Niños. That is a theme park that Perón constructs for Evita in the 40s. And it's like a little republica. You could see the ministers, government houses. It's like a little republica, and the corpse appears there.
the body of a very young girl,
Was raped and
15
killed, right?
Was raped and
years
killed.
old, and an unresolved crime.
And when this thing appears in the newspapers, looks for us like a clear. We have it, but I know it's in the PowerPoint right now. And it looks for us like a clear metaphor of how is justice in our country, and I think in most of the country of our region. And in the other hand, it's very strange that this theme park, there is a myth that says that Walt Disney was inspired by this park to do Disneyland.
Wow.
And then it gets another level of meaning, I don't know. But we always try to talk about our reality and how violence and these kind of things appears in our society.
And you also use images and very particular materials. In the skull that we have downstairs, one of the things that I noticed, which I think is very interesting, the center part is the scene from The Shining with so how do you come across those references? And
Well, as Juliana says, we use the skull as a container to put at the same level art history, our history, pop culture, and trying to talk about the different, for example, you see the Shining, but in front of the Shining there is a cake with a, I don't know how to say adorno.
with a little garland, I guess, a little decoration.
A little decoration that is it's based on a Leon Ferrari work, you know, the crisp.
Yeah, the crucified
Christ
the
on
crucified Christ on the
plane.
bomber on the yeah.
And we're trying to do with these mixed connections, trying to let the people think about our reality.
Okay, well, thank you. Now we're gonna give the microphone to my good friend and compatriota, Yucef Merhi. And we're presenting downstairs this incredible installation called Maximum Security. So, Yucef, please.
Thank you, Isabela. Maybe we can have an image, probably the first one. Right, so I think that would be a good example of what I've been thinking that I could share with you this evening. And I have to say two things before I start telling you about this. The first aspect that surrounds the process of doing this work is poetry. And I'm saying poetry because my background is as a poet. And my first mentors were, the two of them were poets, very well-known poets in Venezuela. So I had the privilege to be involved in the field of poetry for many years. And at some point, I started understanding that many of the works that I was developing were poetical forms. I started doing my work when I was at a very, very young age. And I started exhibiting my work when I was a teenager at museums and exhibition spaces. And I didn't have the notion of what an artist meant, what was the meaning of doing art, because I was just doing it. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't conscious. I didn't have the ego of an artist at that moment. And the second thing I wanted to share with you is that I've been always obsessed with collecting information, with data. And this is something that has become part of my life. Even the way I distribute data within my hard drive is like a network of connections. So having said that, I want to talk about the piece that is downstairs and the system that I employed to develop this work. This is called maximum security. And maximum security is it's a modular installation comprised by the emails of Hugo Chavez, the former and late president of Venezuela. So in 1998, I started intercepting by means of a word that is probably, we always fear about it, and it's hacking. And hacking can be employed as a medium to create art. And I've been using it for probably the late 90s. Since 1997, 1998, to produce a body of works based on databases, emails, information taken from institutions, public people, personalities, governments, also corporations. So in the case of maximum security, what I did is I kept accessing and getting copies of the emails that were sent to Chavez. And by doing that, I was able to collect thousands of emails. In 2004, I decided to exhibit this work. I found that I had enough information to make a monumental installation. And I wallpapered an exhibition space of 4,500 square feet in Los Angeles. This is a very recent version of the work presented in London. And the beauty of it is that people can enter the space and experience the information in a very immersive way. And what you read on this work is the history not only of Venezuela, but also of Latin America for that period of time, from 98 till 2004. But not only that, because, I mean, if we assume that the universe is a fractal, that we live in a fractal universe, then we have to also accept that the information contained on this work and the way that the language has been producing this dialogue between Chavez and the people has been also present in the past and will be also present in the future. So it's a way, it's like if I take a cell from my body, if I take a tissue from my body, that very small piece of organic matter will contain the information, which is called DNA, of my entire structure. So no matter where I take that information will be the same. And I think that happens also with maximum security. It's a mirror of a recurrent event that has been happening for decades, for centuries, and that will occur again and again and again until we use this system called democracy. right? Because democracy also needs its opposite. And through reading this, you can see that there is this tension within a country.
Okay, I'm going to ask you briefly about another work that you've done, and then I'm going to open it to the public so we can get some questions. There's also another very interesting work that you've done, which is called Kingpin. Would you mind talking, which is not exhibited below, but I also think that it's relevant, and if you could talk a little bit about it, it would be
Maybe
great.
we can have an image of that work.
The ones I sent. While she finds it, would you mind? So
Yeah,
we're a little bit
sure.
short of time.
I mean, I think it's easier to describe the works with an image. Or we can do it in a Socratic way.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm going to start talking about Kingpin. You are probably familiar with a list called the Kingpin list, right? That was, I think, created by Bill Clinton during the Bill Clinton administration. And this is, the Kingpin Act is an instrument that allows the President of the United States and the Congress to name criminal kingpins from all over the world and take some action, like freezing their bank accounts, denying visas, or just putting them on jail once they get into US territory. So what I did is I accessed a database managed by US Department of Treasury, which is sent to all the embassies, all the US embassies across the world. And I obtained, in the case of these three series of works, I obtained all the data that was related to kingpins in Venezuela. And the interesting aspect of this is that it reveals not only information about these solicited people, but it also gives you further information about like aliases, how many nationalities they have, what are their connections within different countries. So it's basically a form of identity seen as a network identity. And right, so I think that resumes what Kingpin is about.
Yeah, thank you. Well, since we're very short of time, if anyone has a question, I'm sure there's questions for everyone.
Juan, just a quick question. How do you get access to these crime scenes and to the morgue to get these tags? I mean, the government seems to be very jealous when it comes to that kind of stuff. You can answer in Spanish. You can puede responder en español.
You're in the Criminal Justice College, so you're bound to get that question.
Con mucha... Sí. No, básicamente el primer acercamiento a las escenas de crímenes lo hago a través de los periodistas que cubren la fuente.
So the first access that he has is through journalists who cover all these homicides, and then he very discreetly goes around with a morgue, and right?
La forma como se consiguen los objetos, que creo que es donde viene la pregunta, porque son objetos como delicados, porque terminan siendo evidencias de lo que pasó, ¿no? En Venezuela, como te decía, el tema de las balas, por ejemplo, como se usan se usan aproximadamente entre 5 y 10 municiones por evento, los cuerpos salen de la morgue con algunas balas adentro todavía.
So because of the large number of bullets used in each homicide, God, I'm horrible at translating, but basically, yeah, because many corpses already arrive or with many bullets inside the corpse, so you deal directly with, you know, it's a very delicate way, but you basically deal with the people in the morgue, and that's where you have access to the objects or the bullets which are used in these crimes.
Okay, so I have a very simple question. How do you feel of showing your work in the School of Criminology? Just wondered if you wanted to say something about that.
Bianca, empieza tú. We're going to start from the left to the right.
Esto sí lo respondo en español, por favor. Sí. En mi caso en particular, yo comienzo a ir a esta isla de una manera ilícita. Está prohibido ir a la isla.
So we started visiting this island illegally. So the first approach to the island was done illegally because people were not supposed to go there. Okay.
De hecho, es una isla que está es de posesión de los militares, pero ni siquiera los militares quieren asumir que esa isla y esa responsabilidad es de ellos, entonces le dan la espalda y prefieren ver a la costa en Lima.
So this is an island that is supposedly under the National Guard is supposed to, but they actually don't want even to assume having the power over that island. So it's basically the approach that he made in the first instance was illegal because he wasn't really allowed or to visit it.
Because they want to look at the coast and not to the island. Respondiendo a la pregunta, me interesa mucho, en verdad, la opinión que puedan tener al respecto de esta clase de trabajos en general, no solamente por el mío. Yo creo que cada trabajo artístico no deja de hablar cuando sale del estudio de un artista, sino por el contrario comienza a crecer de la manera en que cada uno asimila o interpreta, reinterpreta lo que el artista o la obra quiere decir.
So he says that he finds it very interesting that it's being exhibited here and that he believes that the work is not finished once it leaves the artist's studio. But on the other side, he believes that it's actually ignited, or that it you know, when people come across it and once, you know, it begins having a dialogue with the public, that's when, you know, it starts to function, per se.
Bueno, para mí es importante mostrar siempre el trabajo en donde se pueda mostrar, porque esa es la realidad que estamos viviendo los venezolanos y es una realidad que cuesta mucho entender afuera. Entonces, de esta forma, exponerlo es una forma de dejar en las personas que lo ven un poco de lo que estamos viviendo nosotros.
So he says that, you know, he's welcome to any place that's open to exhibiting his work, but in a way he believes that it's a way to present the reality of what's going on to Venezuela across the borders, since, you know, it's not being properly represented throughout the world. So he's, you know, open to the possibility of showing it here or anywhere else.
Ya que aprovecho también contestar en castellano. Como dice Juan, es muy importante siempre tratar de comunicarse con la mayor gente posible y exponer en una universidad de criminología justo el tema de la violencia y los temas que estamos tocando todos en conjunto.
So he says that he feels just like Juan, that he's open and he's very much, he welcomes the possibility of exhibiting, but especially here in a college dedicated to educating people in criminal justice.
Y más que acá creo que los temas que tocamos están muy relacionados con la justicia y la injusticia en nuestra región, entonces es muy interesante que esto se muestre en una escuela de criminología acá en Estados Unidos.
So basically, the work, many of the works that they create deal with the whole issue of justice and injustice, and therefore exhibiting it here in a college dedicated to that is very coherent. And it's also a way of representing the injustice and all the horrors that are being lived or have been lived in Argentina outside of its borders here in the United States.
Thank you. We are the monsters of two heads. Estoy de acuerdo con Manuel, absolutamente.
Answering your question, I just have to say that I feel very excited.
Any other? I think Gustavo had a question, right? No? Okay, they're in the back. Yeah, go ahead and ask in loud voice so we can hear. Oh, it would not be heard? Okay, okay, 5 minutes. Okay.
Here? Well, I have a question for Juan. And, well, we are like, we see images of crime every day because the newspapers show it, we see it in the television, so we see so many images that it doesn't really touch us anymore. And still, people are crazy for action movies, for example, and which are basically transforming the crime into entertainment. And now what you're doing is like artwork that is transforming the, how do you say, like the gun patrons into an aesthetical object, like something that doesn't look dangerous anymore, but somehow beautiful. Is this also an answer to our fascination for crime and an answer to our, to this beauty of crime?
Básicamente en la cultura de hoy en día, que hay esta fascinación por la acción y todas las películas de acción, pero que al mismo tiempo tus fotos presentan la belleza de estos objetos, pero que al mismo tiempo si te parece que cómo haces tú con estas imágenes que básicamente se están respondiendo un poco a estetificar o a glorificar esta acción.
Lo que a mí me interesa básicamente es crear diálogo en espacios donde no los hay.
So basically what he's interested in is creating a dialogue in places where it's not allowed to have a dialogue.
Y si la imagen es violenta, es muy difícil crear esos diálogos.
So if the image that he's representing would be violent, it would be very difficult to generate a dialogue.
Por esa razón me llevo los objetos de las escenas al estudio.
That's why he takes the objects recovered from the crimes and from murder scenes, he takes it to his studio to photograph them.
El blanco, el espacio en blanco donde las imágenes descansan es el silencio en donde esos objetos descansan.
So basically the white screen where he photographs these objects or bullets against is the silence, right?
Y ese silencio permite a las personas poder hablar del tema.
And that silence allows people to talk about, these issues that we're dealing with.
Yo vivo en un espacio donde todo el día hay confrontación.
So he lives in a space where every day there's confrontation.
Y cuando he presentado esto en espacios donde se puede hablar, la gente comienza a entender o a hablar de la violencia desde otro punto de vista.
So once these works are presented in a place where a dialogue is allowed, it generates a new conversation. Yeah, so all the artists are going to be downstairs, and Iván, who arrived late, I don't think we have time to talk to you, but anyone who's open to talking to Iván, he'll be downstairs, and I'm sure he'll be glad to answer your questions. He's waving there. And we have this beautiful video by Iván called Retouch, which is presented below. And so 5 minutes so we can have the next panel. And thank you for all the artists for the short notice, and thank you all.
that what he said?
Hey, Doreen, sorry. It's all outside. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Be able to get a little bit of
Yeah,
this when you
yeah,
start again,
yeah.
and then he'll be at
The opening. Great, 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 great. Okay, everybody, let's get started again. Yeah, we have to get moving. 6 o'clock, we have an opening downstairs, so we have to keep moving. Mary, would you take your seat? Take a seat. Thank you. You are the no. Gabriela's at the end. You're in the middle. She's in the middle. No, she's the last one. Gabriela's the last one. Okay. Gabriela's, okay, so, okay, everything's ready? We're ready to go? Yeah? So everybody, this is going to be our last panel today, and this is going to be a panel with 3 fabulous curators and scholars. So I'm going to introduce them all now, and then they're going to speak some, and then we'll open to a few questions if we have time. Otherwise, we'll continue downstairs during the opening of the exhibition. So the first speaker tonight is going to be Estrellita Brodsky. Estrellita is an art historian, curator, and philanthropist. She organized many exhibitions, including Carlos Cruz Diaz, Informed by Color at the American Society, Jesus Soto, Paris and Beyond at the New York University's Gray Gallery, a retrospective on the Argentinian kinetic artist Julio Leparc in São Paulo, and the exhibition Bearing Witness, Art and Resistance in Cold War Latin America, here at John Jay College, among many other exhibitions. She's currently working on an exhibition on the Argentinian artist Julio Leparc, upcoming at the Perez Art Museum in Miami in November. Cecilia-Fajardo Hill is going to be our second speaker. She is a British-Venezuelan art historian and curator in modern and contemporary art, specialized in Latin American art. She's currently co-curating with Andrea Junta the exhibition The Political Body, Radical Women in Latin American Art, 1960-1985, a survey of radical artistic practices by women artists in Latin America and Latina artists, to open in 2017 at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. Cecilia was also the curator of the 19th Bienal de Arte País in Guatemala in 2014. And our last speaker is going to be Gabriela Rangel, who is the Director of Visual Arts and Chief Curator at the American Society here in New York. Gabriela has curated numerous exhibitions on modern and contemporary art on the works of the artists Antonio Manuel, Consuela Castaneda, Carlos Grustias, Gordon Mata Clark, Arturo Herrera, Paula Troppi, and Alejandro Chu Solar. She has contributed to art magazines, Art in America, Parquet, and Art Nexus. Rangel has edited numerous books, and she contributed to publications on Marta Minuhin, Javier Téllez, and Arturo Herrera, among so many others. So let's welcome our speakers tonight.
Is it on now? Yes, okay. Number one, I just want to thank Claudia and Isabela and Vanessa and all the people at the John Jay College for organizing this, and as well as my fellow panelists. The title of my talk is Aesthetic Complicity, the Art of Transgression. Today, as somebody mentioned earlier, we risk becoming visually and mentally immune to injustice in a world inundated with images of violence presented by journalistic media, of actual events, as well as through the entertainment industry. You only need to turn on the news to see atrocities performed routinely on a world stage that knows no boundaries between countries or continents, images of masses of people being displaced, systematic assassination, and terrifying video games. The question posed is whether an artist's practice can engage us with the inhumanity suffered by victims of violence and repression through a dynamic process of what I would term aesthetic complicity, one that does not seek to aestheticize the artistic experience per se, which can be seen as a means of further exploiting the victims depicted, but rather one in which the artist establishes with the viewer a fundamental empathy to what is humane through an act of complicity, a creative, empathic experience in sometimes illicit acts. The artists I will discuss make clear that our awareness of these events make us accomplices through such experiences in a history fraught with violence and inhumanity. The recently deceased Guatemalan artist Aníbal Lopez accused artists and the public of such an act of complicity. Also known by his national ID number as A153167, the artist realized a work in 2000 known as El Préstamo, the loan. The accompanying poster explains on the 29th of September 2000, Aníbal staged an armed robbery attacking an innocent passerby. The stolen money was used to finance his exhibition and reception at the art space Contexto in Guatemala City. Thus, the victim was transformed into an unwitting art sponsor, the witnesses to the holdup, and exhibition guests became collaborators. In the following interview, Aníbal confesses that he didn't want to steal the money to frighten the innocent victims, but he felt that he had to bring attention to the sins of society and that we are all accomplices.
Se trata de asaltar. El préstamo se trata de asaltar a una persona para pedir dinero para poder montar una exposición porque yo no tenía ni un quinto. Y lo hice. Salió un video, pero el video no se mira nada porque es de noche y es complicado, ¿eh? Pero lo hicimos. Lo hicimos porque tuve cómplices. El camarógrafo, yo y el arma, que ni siquiera era mía y estaba descargada. Y entonces le puse la cabeza así, le dije, mira, métete al carro, ahorita me das lo que tenés. Y me sacó como 30 pesos, algo así. Después me sacó 80, fueron como casi $100. Entonces le digo, ¿y eso es todo lo que tenés? Sí, me dice. Va, no quiero tu tarjeta, no quiero tus cheques, no quiero nada de eso, solo esto. Lo dejé ahí metido y me zafucas. Y luego monté la exposición. La exposición decía, vos conocés el préstamo. Ahí les pasás la foto si querés. Que es el 15 del tanto, realicé una acción que consiste en asaltar a una persona de tal edad, esto, lo otro, y todavía me siento culpable, pero había que hacerlo, porque trata sobre la ética y la moral, porque a un artista se le permite hacer todo, y nadie jamás denunció nada. Eso es lo peor, porque me hubieran denunciado. Toda la gente que conoció se fue a tomar su vinito, con eso se pagó el vino además. No todo el vino, parte del vino, pero es parte. Y ese vinito que se tomaron es complicidad. Entonces todos son cómplices. Y aquí nadie se salva. Y el artista, menos. Yo creo que ofrecí un sacrificio que todavía me duele, porque todavía no lo olvido, fue muy fuerte, pero un sacrificio que implica decir que el artista no tiene derecho a hacer todo. Pero nadie hizo nada para decir lo contrario.
Aníbal Lopez, along with artists Santiago Sierra, Iván Navarro, and the historical group La Denuncia, have made it a fundamental part of their artist practices to critique cultural and political power structures through works that test the limits of legal and moral standards within society. Santiago Sierra, who lives and works in Mexico City, often exposes the cultural classification of domination and submission. He participates in transgressive actions and confronts us with conditions of our existence that we are most uncomfortable with. That is the commodification of human life and of art. He addresses situations of exploitation and marginalization and the ways in which legal and cultural significance is attributed to property and social contracts. Provocative and controversial, Sierra engages in acts in which underprivileged individuals are paid for performing degrading actions, as with these two actions in which drug-addicted prostitutes receive the price of a shot of heroin in exchange for having their backs tattooed. In these works, Sierra underscores the inequities in which race, gender, and class are at the core of exploitation and patronage. Sierra's work participates in these acts while critiquing them and leaves one to question the process itself as a form of exploitation that we, the art public, are complicit in that action. In Iván Navarro's 2008 Missing Monuments for Washington, D.C., which we showed in the exhibition Bearing Witness, the Chilean-born artist presents us with an equally haunting image, a video installation that refers to the injustices suffered by a well-known singer-songwriter, Victor Jara, during the brutal coup by General Pinochet overthrowing the democratically elected Salvador Allende in 1973. In many of Navarro's work, the artist uses neon light as a subtle allusion to the precarious, dangerous nature of truth, as in the electric chair. This work shows a tool for executing or torturing criminals in the form of a less than inviting, iconic piece of modernist furniture. In Missing Monument, however, the political reference is more direct in referring to Victor Jara, who was arrested, then tortured and killed in the infamous Estadio Chile, which was used to hold somewhere between 7,000 to 20,000 individuals during the immediate aftermath of Pinochet's coup. Estadio Chile became known as one of the first massive detention and torture camps controlled by the camp. Navarro's fingers allude to individuals hooded as if to be tortured, executed, reciting the words from Jara's last poem song, smuggled out of the stadium after he was tortured, killed, and thrown into a mass grave. What I have seen, I have never seen, read the words of Jara, strewn on posters in front of the video. Furthermore, Navarro universalizes the Chilean experience as the hooded figures in their positions bring to mind the photographs of detainees being tortured and humiliated by U.S. military forces at Abu Ghraib. The title, A Missing Monument for Washington, D.C., also reinforces the notion that the United States Capitol was accountable, should have been accountable, for a missing monument to acknowledge its own role in disruptive and brutal histories, including Pinochet's 17-year dictatorship, a reign marked by torture, murder, and government-ordered disappearances. An earlier generation of Latin American artists demonstrated their opposition to the inhumanities occurring during Brazil's military regime with graphic depictions of torture. In 1972, Julio Laparque and Gontrán Guanais Neto, in collaboration with fellow artists exiled in Paris, Alejandro Marcos and José Gamarra, formed the artist group La Denuncia. They worked together on a politically explicit installation, Sala Oscura de Tortura. It remains today as a testament to the secret detention and interrogation methods used by the Brazilian police at the time, consisting of 7 panels ranging in size from 6 foot square to 4 by 7 foot high canvases. The monochromatically painted works depict human-scale individual men and women in the process of being tortured. Tortura's cell-like installation, a darkened octagonal room into one in which one must enter, was based on detailed accounts recounted to them by the friar Tito de Alenzar Lima, the Brazilian Dominican friar who was arrested in Sao Paulo in 1969, along with other members of the Dominican order. 24 years old at the time, he was severely tortured at the headquarters of the Departamento Estadual de Orden Política y Social de Sao Paulo, known as DEOPS, which is presently the Memorial of Resistance of Sao Paulo. After his release, Frei Tito fled to Paris, where he met with La Denuncia artists, and shortly thereafter, in 1973, Frei Tito, having been ostracized by the Brazilian church, killed himself at the age of 28, seemingly overcome by the ongoing personal conflict between faith and politics. Certainly, representations conveying visual accounts of torture and the atrocities of wars are plentiful, from antiquity to the present. But Goya and the obvious references, but they also were referencing in a more critical fashion depictions of the violence committed in the name of religious morality, as in the 17th and 18th century religious painting, practicing a long tradition of presenting images of human and divine suffering, most notably of Christ and the saints, admired by such as, I'm sorry, didn't move forward. Sorry. I didn't move forward quickly enough. There's Caravaggio. And particularly of interest to Guanais Neto was the 16th century Caravaggio, an artist activist who was disdained by the church. Caravaggio portrayed numerous atrocities recounted in the Bible, as with St. Peter's martyrdom and the entombment of Christ. The figures are not idealized in timelessness, but rather convey suffering as a human condition. And for many Latin American artists, including those who formed La Denuncia, they felt that the church doctrine, the interpretation of church doctrine, advanced the idea that torture should be acceptable as a moral lesson, and criticized the church and its insistence on depictions of hell as a way of legitimizing the use of torture and terrorization rather than conveying any moral lessons. They and other artists, such as Argentine Leon Ferrari, condemned the Catholic Church's complicity in condoning practices of inhumanity and endorsing a culture of terrorism. In conclusion, although the work of Aníbal Lopez in El Préstamo refers to a local incident dependent on a local economy of exploitation, for the 2012 Documenta in Kassel, Germany, the artist invited a known assassin from Guatemala to participate in an international art world event. Aníbal asked the organizers of Documenta, the prestigious modern and contemporary art exhibition, to underwrite the hired killer's travel expenses from Guatemala City to Germany and to facilitate his entry into Germany for a sicario, the Spanish term for a hired assassin. On the day of the event, Aníbal sat quietly in the audience of the large auditorium designated for the occasion. His fellow spectators were mostly white, Anglo-Saxon, and foreign critics and curators or art patrons. The small, thin-frame sicario took his place of honor on stage, seated behind a white screen that offered anonymity. His ghost-like silhouette recalled musicians competing at an orchestral audition. But the subject, however, was not about evaluating musical skill, but rather to judge an individual's moral ethic through his life work and the social and political circumstances he confronted on a daily basis. The sicario presented a short but eloquent testimony describing his life. He then took questions from the audience, who interrogated him for over 30 minutes, curious to find out about the details of his life. Parceling out a type of justice frowned upon in most societies, but not uncommon in Guatemala and the region of Central America where he and Aníbal came from, the sicario was clear that he was satisfying a social and an economic need. It was one that if he didn't satisfy, somebody else would, and most importantly, one that allowed him the ability to financially support his wife and child. This is a clip, it'll be showing downstairs, but this is a short clip from a 45-minute.
Es una organización que tenemos unos militares que andan con nosotros, que son los que nos contratan para que al ejército de Guatemala no se le enjuicie en ningún momento ni los investiguen para poder, para que los castiguen, ¿verdad? Con las leyes de allá. Nosotros somos 4 universitarios de la Universidad de San Carlos que somos los encargados de trabajar toda la logística de las muertes. Yo soy el primordial del grupo, yo soy el negociador, a mí me llaman los encargados, la gente que quiera matar a alguien, a mí me localizan, yo soy el que jalo a las personas para poder ir a trabajar. Nosotros últimamente matamos a 6 en la zona 11 de Guatemala por un problema de drogas. Nos cancelaron buen dinero. Es lo más que hemos, en conjunto, es lo más que hemos matado. Tenemos otras muertes en lo que es la zona 11, capitalina, es donde más hemos estado trabajando. Pues nosotros pusimos un cartel. El Estado de Guatemala nos paga a nosotros para poder hacer limpieza social. Y yo me encargo de investigar y de matar a las personas, ¿verdad? Siempre llevo un compañero o unos 2. Hace un año mataron a mi sobrina, me tocó matar a la gente que eran de la Mara Salvatrucha, unos pandilleros. Eran 3, ellos se murieron en la funeraria. Ese es nuestro tipo de trabajo. Nosotros nos negociamos con la gente, miramos, investigamos primero y después damos el precio para poder cobrar lo que sea necesario, ¿verdad? Solicitamos también que la policía de Guatemala trabaja con nosotros. Nosotros le pedimos a ellos que nos limpien unos 20 minutos el territorio donde trabajamos. Nos ha tocado matar mujeres y niños. Por el mismo trabajo, nos lo piden.
For those in the audience in Kassel, Germany that day, they were decidedly all too familiar with atrocities committed in the name of law. These they knew through their own Holocaust history, but preferred to look away and focus on the offenses this man had committed a continent away. Nevertheless, the common ground for those in the audience and the sicario was an indifference to the social injustices that occur daily, and we all left with a disquieting sense of complicity in those injustices. Before his death in 2015, Aníbal, perhaps more than any other artist, understood that the legal conditions that determine an artist's relationship to the law are critically dependent on the fairness of the social and political situation in which they live. What if the government and its police forces are in themselves lawless and corrupt? For Aníbal, the responsibility of breaking the law as a conceptual gesture was not only a necessity, but also a personal sacrifice. As we continue to face escalating threats to global rationalism, the artists discussed confront us with the question, how are we responsible and complicit for injustices and violence that take place under our watch, whether we choose to see them or not? They expose the viewer to the brutality of realities that we as humans most often avoid, preferring to believe that if we have not witnessed inhumanity, it didn't happen. By placing the viewer in a direct and intimately active relationship with images of and references to torture and political violence, these artists insist on making us see and react. What remains at risk is whether, in light of the legal, moral, and historical groundings of such artistic practices in Latin America, can the notion of art justify the perpetration of illegal or morally provocative acts? Should art be regarded as an exceptional object outside the boundaries of the law simply because an artist defines something as art? And when artists defy social or moral laws, does the public become a complicit participant in these acts? Ultimately, rather than ignoring political and social injustices, these artists have chosen to denounce them in often excruciatingly painful ways that make us all accountable. Thank you.
Thank you for sticking out with us until now. Okay, so the title of my presentation is The Body as Mediator of Violence. Violence for centuries has been turned into an art form, often heroic, as a mode of propaganda to instill in the spectator emotions of hate towards the enemy or heroic identification with the state-promoted machine of war, ethnic and religious cleansing, rape, and murder. For the Church, art has functioned as a powerful tool of indoctrination by fear, both in Europe, in medieval times, and during the colonization of America through violent representations of hell and martyrdom. Because art proposes also to gratify the spectator, the aestheticization of violence converts art into a form of spectacle, which fuels fantasies around violence. When thinking of Latin America, we have to add to this complex relationship towards violence the colonial and third world perception of the continent through the lens of the prevailing portrayal of its history of violent dictatorship, corrupt government, drug cartels, poverty, gangs, and generalized violence. The media shapes, through daily bombastic images and reporting, a one-sided, one-dimensional idea of Latin America. Not all violence is perceived in the same intensity, detachment, or pleasure. Susan Sontag explains this very well. Basically, she explains that when images are very close to us, then they're portrayed in a way that is actually aestheticized. Let's say, for example, the tragedy of September 11, the press didn't actually display any images that were actually full of blood and et cetera, et cetera. It was a different type of drama. But for example, if it relates to dark-skinned people and people who are far away from us in Asia, in Africa, and so forth, it's very easy to actually display the whole array of death, decapitation, blood, and so forth. So in a way, there has been a tendency to actually, depending on the race and how distant we are, to actually fetishize a lot more violence. So thinking of this, how may contemporary art in Latin America dealing with violence escape the stereotypes of inevitable victimhood and colonial other if it is contextualized within this mediatic reality? For me, one of the answers is performance. Performance offers the possibility of resistance and also of bridging the distance between artists, the concept and realities presented, and the spectator. In a very interesting lecture by a performer specialist called Andrea Lepecki, he expands on the notion that performance has no function within a stable and natural notion of the body as a fixed vessel of self-contained knowledge or self-centered subject, but that the body might be considered as a corporeality, as something contingent, circumstantial, and in deep relation with the political forces and structures of the world. Lepecki describes how performers emerged after the World War II with the crisis of the notion of the body and the human in the context of the pervasive violence and brutality of the world. He describes the body as multiplicity, circumstantial, the body in constant formation, deformation, and transformation, and therefore capable by performance of resisting and questioning this violence. It is with this idea proposed by Lepecki of an unstable body filled with the power of rebellion that I put forward a group of performance artists that deal with the realities of violence both in Latin America and the world. So the first artist I have is Tania Bruguera, who is a highly controversial artist. A lot of people have issues with her work, but she really believes that the right and the idea that artists can be activists. So it's a combination of artists and activists, because they're an active part of society and as such have the right to disagree with power and with the status quo. Her work has been focusing on censorship because though she believes in socialism, she finds a lack of freedom of expression or repressive measures by the government in Cuba inhuman and contrary to the whole principle of the revolution. This particular performance was done on May 20th, on the anniversary of the Republic of Cuba during the inauguration of the 12th Havana Biennale. And what she proposed was the collective reading of Hannah Arendt, The Origin of Totalitarianism. What happened was that when she actually proposed this idea, the government forbid her from doing it in public. She did it in her house. She put a speaker going to the street, but then they sent a group of people to actually dig the street in front of her house and made it impossible for people to come and actually for people to listen. The very lack of freedom and censorship that Bruguera addresses with the collective reading of Arendt's book is at the core of the unquestionable necessity for living today and for making art. That this quiet gesture involved an attack on the freedom and integrity of the artist's body is the very manifestation of the need of his existence. Because what happened is when she ended the reading of the book, the police was waiting, the guard was waiting outside and actually took her into the car, and we didn't know what had happened to her for several hours. They took her and they interrogated her, but we didn't know if she was going to disappear. So this is a collective performance where life and art coexist in the possibility of resisting forms of oppression. Another artist I wanted to show is Antonio Paucar. I will show you, while I describe you a little bit the work, a few seconds of the performance. He's an artist from Moncayo from 1973. A little bit lower the voice, the sound. It's called Paso de Adaptación y Desprendimiento. It was done in 2015 for MD 15 in Medellin. And it's a performance where he actually deals with the idea of a continued existence of violence despite the apparent progressive nature of Medellin as a city. He observed how many children still today, despite this kind of really modern and growing city, still go to the military school, and he saw children in the street playing with the uniform, and this kind of official way of dealing with reality and play is all passing through the idea of the military. And also this idea of the tension between this leg of a woman, I don't know, the video is actually playing very slowly, is also a reference in Medellin, despite of the fact of being progressive as a city. They actually are completely cleansing the idea of transgender people, and also the violence towards women is still kind of very endemic. So this idea of this kind of tension between this leg of this kind of military person and this leg of a woman or a transgender person. Anyway, I don't have a lot of time, so I have to continue, I'm afraid. One of the aspects that is very interesting about performance sometimes is that the idea of the collective work has a transformative power in itself. This is an artist called Monica Meyer. She's been working, she's a feminist artist from Mexico. She's been working since the 1970s. And she produced in 1978 the first version of this work called Entendedero, that was actually done to discuss publicly with people issues of gender violence, and especially towards women. So for this Encuentro Internacional de Artes de Medellín in 2015, she organized workshop with artists, activists, and activists in Medellin, and they discussed how they wanted to actually create this new version of El Tendedero. It's a work that has been evolving in form and in a way, and so in the workshop they decided to go into the street with aprons and ask people to ask questions about sexual harassment. And it's very interesting in her, she works with the idea of an archive. I read a comment from a man who participated in this project, and he's called Luis Gabriel Angel Gomez. And he said this: to denaturalize violence is only possible if we all feel the pain for it, to share it, to listen to it, to write to it, to denounce it, to make the personal sufferings into collective affliction. A feminist principle is the idea that the public becomes personal and so forth. So now I wanted to show you Teresa Margolles. This is another one of a woman participating. She participated in the Paes Biennale in 2012, and she worked in collaboration with a group called Adam Khan. And she, as you know, Teresa Margolles works with the idea of institutionalized violence and bodily fluids. And she wanted to focus on the issue of femicide, which is not only endemic in Ciudad Juarez, but also in Guatemala. And these women work for the right of women against violence. So she went to the morgue, found an image, a cloth that had been covering the sheet of a woman that had died with a violent death, and then asked for these women to embroider images in black and whites and gray that had to do with this kind of violence. And what happened was that these women did not actually embroider in grays and blacks and so forth, but they embroidered in any colors they wanted. And they not only combined images of violence, there was a weapon here and there, but they embroidered a lot of images that had to do with kind of hope and flowers and quetzal things. So there was a kind of an act of affirmation. But the wonderful thing about it is that when this happened, these women understood that by actually collectively embroidering, there was this act of where they were able to speak about all this kind of unspeakable thing. And that created a bonding between them, and they decided in their own terms to continue to work with this project, and they created one for the following Paes Biennale in which I work, which is called The Strength, where she used a cloth, and they took it with all these different places that have some kind of symbolic value with the idea of sufferance and the strength that you can actually pull out from the idea of sufferance. And it was actually a wonderful thing to observe, and they continue. They even actually have asked men that have actually portrayed violence to sit and embroider with them and ask each other questions, and it's some sort of healing situation. Teresa Serrano is an artist from Mexico that works a lot with the idea of women and violence in macho society. And this is And this is to do with the Ciudad Juarez, and she invited an actor to actually, it's called La Piñata. Basically, it's a very, very strong performance where this man slowly kind of dismantles and destroys this doll, and is a life size, has even a wig. It's very, and is dressed in the way that the girls dress in the factories. So this is Regina José Galindo, is another artist from Guatemala, and she's part of the exhibition downstairs. And she has a particular way of working that somehow she exposes, she puts herself in a position of victim in her performances, often being subjected to violence and humiliation through the making of conscious choice of actually playing this role. She promotes a crisis of conscience in the spectator, and paradoxically reverses the role of the viewer, who by having no choice but becoming involved emotionally and mentally, experiences the pain of the other. In this case, this is a performance that he did in New York in 2009. It's called Crisis Cloth, where she sells a cloth, but by every person that bought the cloth had to actually remove the clothing from her body. This is Jorge de Leon, an artist in Guatemala that talks about rejection. He was abandoned by the mother, and she had a very long history of kind of violence himself in his own body, and then he tried to re-experience the idea of being born from this body of this carcass that was there, and it was kind of a sort of a half-failed attempt. But so De Leon's body is large and strong, but in this performance he appears vulnerable in this utopian and most human of desire to be born with less resistance and more acceptance. The unstable body of De Leon in his performance evidences a transformative corporeality that confronts us profoundly with questions of violence inside out, and is about a pain that has actually, it passes through him and is inspired also by a very famous painting by Rembrandt, which is a study of light and shade and shadow. So changing, this is Jessica Caire, who is also an artist from Guatemala. It's called Such is Life in the Tropics, and is a
Buenas,
work.
les estaré mostrando cómo preparar algunas armas caseras en caso de emergencia o alguna intrusión en su hogar.
Oh no, you have to go back. Well, in any case, I mean, this is a different approach to the idea of violence, which doesn't have to do so much with this, and is the idea of approaching it through the idea of violence and humor, and also this is perceived as a kind of a collective act. And the way she did it, it was a series of interactive workshops led in person or via Skype, where she taught people how to make weapons of self-defense with tropical fruits. It refers here to Martha Rosa's Semiotics of the Kitchen, which is a feminist gesture. But it's something quite wonderful, is the idea of self-defense linked with the shared pleasure of eating through the sensuality of tropical fruit. So the communal exercises becomes a positive form of mediation and liberation from violence, as well as a metaphor for the impossible task of civilians in front of systemic violence in Guatemala.
Cuando los humanos decidieron comenzar a diseñar armas ya no solamente para cazar, sino para matar. Para esto necesitaremos una yuca con una punta bastante fina.
Yeah, just a couple of more seconds and then.
Como es el kiwano. Si no encuentran un kiwano, podrían siempre utilizar otra, como por ejemplo la pitaya, una alcachofa o una tuna, siempre y cuando tengan más o menos las mismas cualidades, como por ejemplo estas puntas filudas y la forma bastante redonda, grande y maciza. Para esto tomaremos nuestro cuchillo pequeño y comenzaremos a cortar una incisión circular en una de las puntas del kiwano. Esto será porque luego vamos a insertar la yuca dentro de ese agujero y trabarlo para así tener nuestra arma lista. Entonces comenzaré por hacer este
Anyway, we don't have time to continue watching, but it is a very funny, and I think probably this video is online, and Jessica Caray is an artist based here in New York. Okay. So I wanted to talk now about the last two artists. One of them is María Belia Marmolejo. She's a Colombian artist based here in New York. She's actually here in the public. And this is a work, I mean, she's been working since the late 1970s, and her work has been engaged with political oppression in Colombia since the 70s and 80s, the role of women in patriarchal society, environmental issues. The work I wanted to mention, if you want to move to the next slide, It's called Extractivismo. This is a piece that she did in 2015 for an exhibition in Milan, and is related to the artist's engagement with colonialism and environmental issues. I'm afraid I will have to kind of go fast. But for this performance, Marmolejo plays live leeches to extract blood from all over her body over a period of 30 minutes. The slow and silent extraction of blood from her body symbolizes the suffering of the earth in the way we humans are extracting its natural resources such as oil, gold, and wood, while we destroy and pollute. You see, this is towards the end of the performance, as well as exploit other humans. As the leeches were removed, they left painful marks from which blood continued to trickle. Thus, the extraction of blood stands here for the current unrelenting pillage of the world. This is a little bit also to extrapolate on the idea that the way that we may discuss issues of violence in Latin America may extrapolate to kind of broader issues too. And my last artist is Maria Jose Arjona, who I will leave that going until I finish because I'm about to finish. She's also an artist from Colombia and really truly is an artist whose work could hardly be said to relate to the idea of violence. And in a way, that's why I bring her here to close this small talk. There is an analogy, part of a group of work that she's been calling Avistamiento, that started in 2014, where there is some sort of metaphorical analogy between the human and the bird, between existence and flight in this ongoing project. So she observed how pigeons in Europe, she was in 2015 in London during the time of the huge migration crisis. And pigeons basically are thrown out from everywhere, spikes are constructed everywhere, they try to poison them, and somehow they survive. So there is a metaphor between pigeons and human in the way they're contained and controlled by all kinds of violent mechanisms. So it's a metaphor for society's reluctance of refusal to open up to accept the other. So in this piece, for me, it really speaks very much about the vulnerability of a human being and resistance, this idea of a naked body that is surrounded by spike and is, but nevertheless is capable of somehow poetically resist this. So my conclusion is, through the work of some key performing artists, we have suggested how a body may engage, resist, and transform violence without replicating and falling victims to it. The unstable creative corporeality of the body in performance allows for a more reflective, emphatic, and thoughtful engagement with the world and its adversities, reaching the audience beyond traditional art historical representation and the passive absorption of undiluted media hyperviolence. Thank you.
Well, I think I'm the last. I have a very strong accent, as my friend Gustavo Buntix. So excuse me if I'm not going to read very fast as my colleagues. Thank you, Claudia, Vanessa, Isabela, and all the organizers for this symposium. I want to say some words before I started reading my text. The conference concise statement and its punchy title address a number of questions that pertain to the relationship between art and violence in Latin America, which has been the crux of historiographical approaches that consider artistic practices from the 60s and to the 80s labeled as conceptual. A statement by Edwin Panofsky rings the bell about the risks involved when interpreting an artwork as reactive to violence, and I want to read this statement. The relationship of the eye to the world is, in truth, a relation of the soul to the world of the eye. I think it's a very beautiful statement. Once again, the terms art and violence seem to be paired as inexorable traits of the cultural edifice of the region, but reframed in present tense. Moreover, these 2 points of departure are described in blatant ideological terms, as it has been the case in recent past with analysis of art manifestations that, according to the doxa, responded critically to the bad marriage of foreign interventionist policies with local conditions of repression, such as Silo Meireles insertions. Sorry, I'm not passing this, and I'm supposed to be randomly passing the... Well, they should be like in a loop, you know, like in a discotheque. Like in Silo Meireles, I was talking about the foreign intervention in policies with local conditions of repression, such as in Silo Meireles insertion projects, or the actions undertaken by the Argentine collective Tucumanarde, works that everybody knows in this room, as they are the emblem for that period called the Cold War. Because the Cold War has not ended, I would like to move in an opposite direction in order to open a box of representation through its constitutional element, violence. Violence as a dysfunctional apparatus of seeing, violence as a condition for seeing. Therefore, I will read 3 short texts that are neither fact nor fiction. And the title of my texts, which are part of a fictional project that I have, are called The Distance Between Words and Things. And the first text is Modern Art. On December 9 or 10, 1980, I have to say that this version of the text was translated by Christopher Winks, who's an amazing poet and a better translator. My English is so poor that I need this. Anyway, on December 9 or 10, 1986, I don't remember exactly when, I left for San Antonio de los Baños. I know the trip happened after December 8 because on that date I received a letter asking me to leave the hotel for the purpose of beginning the process of adaptation. And I quote this phrase verbatim. The night before, I wound up at a party at the house of an official poet whose invited guests included Robert Redford, Sidney Poitier, Susana Amaral, the sister of the art historian Arací Amaral, and many other foreign guests of the Cuban Film Festival and members of the nomenclatura of the Cuban Writers and Artists UNEAC and the Cuban Institute of Cinematographic Art and Industry, ICAIC. The majority of the attendees were men dressed in guayaberas, drinking mojitos and daiquiris made with Matusalem rum. The poet's daughter, at the time a young professor of literature at the University of Havana, undertook a Sherazade-style plan of seduction, drawing up unknown tales of the revolution, like the one about the paintings decorating her house in El Vedado. All of them fake. Fake Picassos, fake Matas, fake lamps, fake Legés. I asked her, who could have made copies sufficiently convincing as not to alarm the Cuban authorities over the disappearance of their patrimonial assets? She answered that the master forger of paintings worked in ICAIC's art department, sharing the profits with her father, the poet, in a Swiss bank account. They have an understanding, you know. I awoke in a daze very early in order to pack. I left on foot from the Hotel Nacional to the parking lot of the modernist-style Copelia ice cream store on Calle 23 a few blocks away from the Rampa at the Malecón where the Havana Cinemateca was located. Despite my sleepiness and the usual cold of the Caribbean winter, the listlessness of the moment was palpable to me in the zombie-like movements and gestures of the assembled people, who scrutinized us with distracted curiosity despite the ungodly hour. The checkmate bus, with a capacity of 30 passengers, left almost empty at 6:30 a.m. on the dot, noisily hitting the road with a strong smell of cheap gasoline, while the driver expertly dodged a series of potholes pockmarking the broken surface of the pavement. Dawn had not yet broken when we passed at top speed through the districts of El Vedado, Playa, and Cubanacan. and went in the direction of a suburban road dotted with residential buildings built after the 1970s, which we would later call sarcastically Bay of Peaks architecture. I remember that the noise of the motor took up at the space and time of those lengthy trips, making any conversation almost impossible. During this trip in particular, the passengers kept or simply gazed absorbedly through the windows at the unchanging landscape outside. The driver slowed the speed of the vehicle on a bumpy crawl. A moist, fresh odor of earth made itself sense. The morning sun came out and revealed to us a broad, unpaved road in which we moved with difficulty as we entered a flat landscape surrounded by pastures planted with sugarcane. We went down a long, monotonous stretch of the rural two-lane highway until, upon reaching a crossroads where the road widened, the driver abruptly slammed on the brakes, causing suitcases and handbags to fall, which roused us from the lethargy. Without a word, the driver turned off the motor, leaving us stranded in the middle of the road, and lighting a cigarette, got out of it to chat calmly with a group of soldiers assembled on the roadside. Somebody asked if we have arrived. Arrived? Where? I thought. There we were, on a bus which sounded like a rusted coffee pot in the middle of the desolate spot, 6 or 7 young people no older than 24, from various Latin American countries, along with the occasional Francophone or Lusophone African, half asleep, perhaps hung over from the night before, without knowing why the hell we had to stop here. We got out to stretch our legs, only to be immediately reprimanded by the soldiers and the driver, who warned us to get back to the bus for security reasons. The moment we started boarding, one of the young passengers, looking out towards a point in the highway, said in a strong Argentine accent, "A MiG. It is an MiG-29. We all looked at the direction and saw a dilapidated military band towing a fighter plane by a rope. The blonde pilot, tall and heavy-set, was outside the plane and surveyed the scene with the same fascination as we did. Day was breaking. The second one is special period. The general alarm sounded, followed by an announcement over the loudspeakers. The executive director, Dolores Calviño Lola, was calling a general assembly in the lecture hall. The loudspeakers were located next to the dining hall, in the long corridor that linked the naves of the 2 buildings that formed the infrastructure designed for the school. On the one side was the residential area with rooms with beds occupied by 3 students, and on the other the classrooms, the sound, video, and photography labs, and the film studios. Between the corridor and the 2 buildings was a huge atrium equipped with metal furniture suited to the elements, a few tables and tropical plants, along with a row of elegantly erect palm trees. The secretaries and the assistant director often used the loudspeaker to routinely announce long-distance phone calls, the arrival of telexes and packages, and other odds and ends from afar, unthinkable in today's era of express courier services, the internet, and cell phones. Thanks to an announcement over those loudspeakers, I found out, through a telex sent by one of my sisters, about the birth of my first nephew, Carlos Alberto, on May Day, as befits the grandson of a communist, to quote the message. But rarely did Lola make the announcements. And when that happened, we have to pay attention to the news brought by the high-level functionary, bureaucrat, the wife of Julio Garcia Espinosa, theorist of imperfect cinema. Nearly 2 years have passed since the founding of the pedagogical institution supported by the will and the funds of the writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez and the occasional European partner in solidarity, like the engineer Jean-Pierre Vaubiela, the brilliant inventor and proprietor of atom cameras in Grenoble, who had collaborated with Jean Rouge, Félix Guattari, and filmmakers associated with the French New Wave in making more lightweight technical equipment for documentary cinema. Garcia Marquez designated the Argentine Fernando Virri, founder of the so-called School of Santa Fe, already somewhat elderly and in perpetual exile in Italy from the many Argentine dictatorships, as the artistic director approved by the filmmakers committee that headed the foundation for the new Latin American cinema. Alfredo Bryce Echenique and Eduardo Galeano were also called upon Gabo to give special writing courses, flouting the rules governing instructors. They got drunk with the students on Russian vodka during parties that conjure up the Bacchic rituals described in the tropical effusions of Lezama Lima's Paradiso. Robert Redford gave a talk on independent initiatives, and Brian Eno spoke about the film music. The film school began on a solid footing, sponsored by an international committee of filmmakers of the cosmopolitan left, close to Garcia Marquez, who succeeded in bringing together, during the inaugural years, students younger than 24 from North, Central, South America, Asia, and Africa, and instructors with a modern outlook who were well situated in their countries. But not long after its inception, serious rumors flew that Comandante Castro was not favorably disposed toward it. There wasn't a speculation about the hostility to the course of study exhibited by Alfredo Guevara, Fidel's right-hand man, who, it was said, had incited the leader against the open and released pedagogical approach taken by Virri on the cycle of Cubans around Garcia Marquez and Garcia Espinosa. The students of the Instituto Superior de Arte thronged our parties and romances, and marijuana was smoked freely in the rooms, albeit with a certain discretion. And as the Rolling Stones will say, it was exclusively for personal use, along with other substances imported directly from the Altiplano. Anonymous graffiti appeared on the walls, "Get dirty or get out." And the first black and white 16 millimeters show great aesthetic affinity with queer British cinema and the films of Leos Caras, Jim Jarmusch, and Hal Hartley. The heavy influence of unorthodox filmmakers like Alejandro Jodorowsky and Andrei Tarkovsky, and virulent and critical one like Jean-Luc Godard, Jacques Rivette, or Rouge himself was felt. Nobody seriously discussed imperfect cinema of Lukács theory, or scratchy Stalinist minority who continually complain about our bourgeois attitudes and lack of attention to the real problems of Latin America and the suffering third world. In parallel, several instructors accepted the lysergic socialist bohemia in the first generation of filmmakers by transgressing professional barriers and initiating amorous relationship with some of the classmates, with whom they ended up living in couples. The impromptu assembly brought us to San Antonio de los Baños, the illustrious presence of Garcia Espinosa, along with other distinguished personages of ICAIC who rarely set foot in the school. Armando Hart, Minister of Culture, began the order of the day's debate with a dull and convincing speech warning the students of a dangerous international conspiracy against the film school. At the time, it was said that Hart, that he had never recovered from the suicide of his companion, Aide Santa Maria, heroine of the Moncada barracks, who it was speculated had a strong ideological break with Fidel and Raúl that precipitated her death. After listening to Hart, Garcia Espinosa took the floor, followed by Fernando Virri, who offered different versions of the catastrophic threat hatched by the enemies of the film school, who, according to them, were planning to invade the school's physical plant from the US. What's more, Garcia Espinosa and Virri undermined their prestige as serious filmmakers in the eyes of the students by affirming that the Cuban intelligence agencies had material evidence of the conspiracy led by the dissident Nestor Almendros under the auspices of CIA. Silence fell, followed by a question from incredulous students who, in their alarm, increased the paranoid tone of the speakers. With long faces and excitement produced by the excessive consumption of coffee and cigarettes that Lola allowed us that afternoon in the lecture hall, there were followed lengthy chain of interventions in an interminable question and answer session that lasted a little over 3 hours in a delirious performance made by the measure of the Cabaret Voltaire. The end of the assembly was directed by the will of the kitchen staff, whose last boss town demanded that we adjourn the assembly to eat within an hour. The exit from the space was carried out in silence, and many went for a walk without eating anything, lost in thought. I think I just have 1 more minute. It's a pity, it's the best one. Fidelito's phone call had been very brief. Looking back, I will say it was curt, even dried. He asked me to look for him in the lobby of the Hotel Presidente on Saturday morning. Not too early, I said, knowing that it involved something serious. Fine, I'll see you at 12, and we'll get something to eat around here. Don't bring anyone, okay? Going to Havana on Saturday to see Fidelito involved me having to travel early Friday evening in the noisy Czech bus and enduring the inhuman heat of the Caribbean summer, and then looking for a place to crash in the city, in the house of friends who had an extra bed in their lofts or who would ask for nothing in exchange. Before leaving, I entertained myself working on the soundtracks for a documentary in the sound laboratory where my friend G wanted to combine all the rhythms of the Caribbean bars frozen in time into a device that anticipated the prefabricated invention of right color in Buena Vista Social Club. We animatedly discussed her ideas without reaching any agreement. I went for a short walk through the school's desolate corridors and felt a bitter sensation of catastrophe, a break with 3 years of coexistence that involved a radical separation from people with whom I have shared the adventure in extremity that we have lived through those years of apprenticeship. The classes with African students from Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso, Guinea, who in the end complain of their immense solitude and the racism of female students who refuse to surrender to their erotic advances. The strange confession of a Chicana activist from San Antonio, Texas, who confided to some foreign journalists her depression at the discrimination she suffered as a sexual and ethnic minority at the school's hands, which caused a scandal in the international circles around Birri's administration. We had to attend an act of repudiation against a gay boy in the town of San Antonio who had gotten involved with an instructor whose contract has not been renewed. Furthermore, the Cuban boy had married a female friend of his lover who intended to bring him to Brazil once the visa process had concluded. Repudiation, as many of you know, is a ritual practiced in Cuba which involves a large group of massing in front of the dwelling of the repudiated man or woman in order to make public his or her condition of counter-revolutionary and traitor. To hurl insults, proclamation, stones thrown, above all condemned, they to be accused of ostracism. We were witnesses to the moral and psychological destruction of the only student from India, a beautiful and sophisticated girl of 26 trained under the protective wing of Stuart Hall. Yes, Stuart Hall, and who had fallen into a melancholic pit of alcohol and pills after vainly attempting to film AIDS patients confined in the Mazorra Psychiatric Hospital of La Habana. In Lina, the pretty and Mozambican girl who tried several times to take her own life by swallowing pills from the school dispensary and who ended up interned in Mazorra without being able to count or anyone from the family to rescue her from the Cuban psychiatric wards. We were much saner than anyone would think, even when we were required that after that assembly to defend the school with clubs and machetes in night patrols along with instructors. We decided to take advantage of the compulsory all-nighters of guard duty and give ourselves extra days on film screenings, developing film negatives, and reading film theory. This special regime lasted almost 2 months and was suspended without any proof being offered of the Machiavellian plan to destroy the school. Fidelito, a boy of my age who studied economics, received me in the hotel lobby seated in an armchair, and without any preamble told me that he will walk to his car, park outside, and go to a very special place in the barrio of La Víbora. He drove in silence when I asked him what was going on. He told me that the waters were troubled and purges within the party were about to happen. He asked me for a cigarette, which he smoked with unmitigated pleasure. He anticipated that things will get tough for the students. He recommended that I be careful with at whom I went out when with what I said. I looked at him disconcertedly and alarmed, and he said, "Girl, stop messing around. Don't trust anybody. Kid, they're watching you closely. They already warned your father and called me so to talk to you. Things are getting hot, really hot." Without thinking about it much, I said that I was fed up with this tropical bohemianism, that I will go to Europe or maybe the US, but meantime, it's back home I go. Relieved, he looked squarely at me and said that it was the best decision I could take because things were going to happen, and he couldn't help me the way that he wanted to. He changed plans and ended up drinking at my favorite bar, the San Lázaro Oyster Bar, located near the University of Havana. The combustion caused by the glasses of Eastern European wine that Fidelito drank loosened the tongue of the son of the president of the Cuban Communist Party. This disaster has to do with the Comandante Ochoa, who came back from Angola and shook everything up. If only he stayed in Africa like a Roman legionary.
Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, we're really out of time, so why don't we continue this conversation at the reception downstairs?